Something strange happens in The Boys when violence isn't just violence anymore. When a kill feels like it means something deeper, something uncomfortable. That's exactly what happens when Soldier Boy kills Quinn. On the surface, it looks simple. A dangerous threat appears and Soldier Boy eliminates it. Clean, efficient, done. But if you pay attention, if you really watch what the show is doing, this moment is layered with implication, history, and something that looks a lot like buried guilt. Because Quinn isn't just another enemy. Quinn feels like a reminder, and Soldier Boy doesn't just stop him, he erases him. Before breaking it all down, here's the quick reality of what this scene is doing. The show presents Quinn as a failed or unstable outcome of early experimentation, someone who has been left behind, hidden, or forgotten. Soldier Boy, in contrast, represents the version that worked, the one who was polished, elevated, and turned into a symbol. When these two collide, the conflict isn't just physical, it becomes symbolic. Success versus failure, legacy versus abandonment, image versus reality. And when Soldier Boy kills Quinn, it can be read not just as eliminating a threat, but as destroying a reflection he refuses to confront. Now, let's go deeper. Quinn's importance doesn't come from how long he appears on screen, but what he implies about Vought's past. The show has always hinted that the early days of Compound V experimentation were far from clean. Before superheroes became celebrities, they were experiments, unpredictable, unstable, and often disposable. Quinn fits perfectly into that darker version of the timeline. While the show doesn't spell out every detail, it strongly suggests that not everyone who received early versions of Compound V turned out to like Soldier Boy. Some, like Quinn, became something else entirely, something that couldn't be controlled, marketed, or even acknowledged. And that distinction matters. Because Homelander, Soldier Boy, and the modern Supes represent refinement. They are the end product of years of trial and error. Quinn, on the other hand, feels like the error itself, the part of the process that had to be buried so the final product could exist. If you look at it that way, Quinn isn't just a character, he's evidence. Evidence that Vought didn't just create heroes, they created failures too. And those failures didn't all die. Some of them were left behind. That's where Quinn's resentment, implied or otherwise, starts to make sense. If he was part of that earlier wave, then his existence is defined by neglect. He wasn't celebrated, he wasn't refined, he wasn't chosen. Whether or not the show explicitly spells out his full backstory, his condition alone tells you enough. He's not functioning like a hero, he's surviving like something abandoned. And over time, that kind of isolation doesn't just change your body, it changes your mind. Now place Soldier Boy in that context. Soldier Boy isn't just strong, he's validated. Everything about his identity is built on recognition. He was positioned as a symbol of strength, patriotism, and dominance. He didn't just survive the experiment, he benefited from it. And whether he admits it or not, that kind of validation becomes addictive. It becomes the foundation of who you are. So what happens when someone like Quinn appears? Someone who came from a similar origin but ended up completely different. That's where the tension becomes psychological, because Quinn represents a version of the story that Soldier Boy doesn't control, a version where the experiment didn't produce a hero, but something unstable, something discarded. And if that version exists, then Soldier Boy's success starts to look less like inevitability and more like selection. That's an uncomfortable idea, and the show subtly leans into that discomfort. There's also another layer here involving how Soldier Boy is framed throughout the series. For most of his existence, he's been treated as the peak, the standard. But when he's placed alongside newer Supes, especially Homelander, that image starts to crack. Homelander isn't just another hero, he's the upgraded version, stronger, more controlled, more dangerous, and more importantly, he doesn't carry the same visible imperfections. So now, Soldier Boy is caught between two realities. On one side, there's Quinn, a reminder of failure, instability, and abandonment. On the other, there's Homelander, a reminder that even success can be replaced. And in the middle is Soldier Boy, trying to hold on to an identity that suddenly feels less secure than it used to. This is where Quinn becomes more than just a threat. He becomes a trigger. Because when Soldier Boy confronts Quinn, he's not just facing something dangerous, he's facing something unresolved. The show doesn't need to explicitly state that Soldier Boy sees himself in Quinn. It doesn't. The parallel is already there. Same system, different outcome. And that's enough. Now, let's talk about the actual kill. On the surface, the justification is clear. Quinn is dangerous. The spores, whether you interpret them as literal biological threats or as part of his mutated condition, pose a risk. Eliminating him stops the spread, contains the situation, and restores control. From a tactical standpoint, Soldier Boy's decision makes sense. But the boys rarely operates on just one level. Because what makes this moment stand out isn't just the action, it's the context around it, the tension leading up to the confrontation, the emotional pressure Soldier Boy is under, and the subtle framing of Quinn as something more than just an enemy shift how the scene feels. It stops being purely strategic and starts feeling personal. And that's where interpretation comes in. One way to read this moment is simple. Soldier Boy does what he always does. He identifies a threat and destroys it. That's consistent with his character, direct, aggressive, and efficient. But another reading, and arguably a more interesting one, is that Soldier Boy doesn't just see Quinn as a threat. He sees him as something that shouldn't exist, not just physically, but narratively. Quinn disrupts the story Soldier Boy believes about himself, a story where he is the strongest, the chosen, the successful outcome. If Quinn exists, that story becomes incomplete. And if that story becomes incomplete, then Soldier Boy's identity starts to weaken than it used to. So when he kills Quinn, it can be interpreted as more than survival. It becomes control over the narrative, over the past, over what gets remembered and what gets erased. And this interpretation becomes even stronger when you consider how Frenchie interacts with Soldier Boy. Frenchie understands people. He understands pressure points. When he pushes Soldier Boy towards action, it doesn't feel random. It feels calculated. He knows that Soldier Boy won't respond to careful reasoning, but he will respond to emotional triggers, especially those tied to pride and dominance. So the situation escalates, and once it escalates, Soldier Boy does what he always does. He ends it. But ending it doesn't resolve it, because here's the key thing. The moment Quinn dies, the question he represents doesn't go away. It lingers. If anything, it becomes stronger, because now there's no confrontation left, only implication. And the boys thrives on implication. This is also why this moment feels like setup, not just payoff. It opens a door to a bigger conversation about Vought's history, about how many early experiments went wrong, how many people were discarded, and how much of the current superhero system is built on hidden failures. The upcoming Vought Rising is already positioned to explore that exact space, and characters like Quinn feel like early glimpses into that darker past. If that's the direction the story is heading, then Quinn isn't just a one-off character. He's a signal that the clean, controlled image of superheroes we see now was built on something far messier and far more human. Which brings us back to Soldier Boy, because for all his strength, all his confidence, all his dominance, there's something fragile underneath. Not weak, but dependent. Dependent on being seen a certain way. Dependent on being the best. And the moment that image is challenged, even indirectly, it creates tension. Quinn doesn't need to say anything profound to challenge Soldier Boy. He just needs to exist. And that's what makes this scene so effective. It's not loud in the way you expect. It's not about long speeches or dramatic reveals. It's about presence, about what Quinn represents simply by being there, and about what Soldier Boy chooses to do with that presence. He destroys it. And in doing so, he restores order, at least on the surface. But underneath, something shifts. Because once you've been confronted with a version of your past that doesn't fit your identity, you can't completely unsee it. You can bury it, ignore it, or eliminate the source, but the idea itself remains. That's the real impact of Quinn. Not what he does, but what he reveals. And that's why this moment matters. Not because it answers questions, but because it raises better ones.